So let me talk real quickly about the front-end planning process and the life cycle of a project. I'm not going to bore you too much, but I think it's good for us to get a central basis of where we're discussing, and then we can kind of talk through what it happens as we go. So this is the definition of the front-end planning process that we came up with in 1994 at CII, Construction Industry Institute. And I'll point out, and I did, a few words I think that are important. First of all, that planning process, which is the precursor to design, it's the initiation of the project to the detailed design process, is a process, which is nice. We can measure it, we can write things down about it. It's not at the tactical level, it's not at the detail level, it's at the strategic level. We're making big decisions, trying to minimize our risk as we go through the process. It's where owners must be engaged. As I said earlier, that's one of the tenets that we found that is critical to the success of a project. And as we go through that process, and many times it's a cascading process, we start out with literally many different options. We start making decisions until we've narrowed it down into a scope of work that can actually be built. Sometimes the best outcome from front-end planning is that we do not build a facility. And I'll get to that in just a few moments. Planning is not new. I'm going to give you several things as we go through here. This one's out of the Bible 3,000 years ago. I can show you quotes from many different cultures around the world where people talked about planning. As soon as they started writing things, they started talking about planning. One of my favorite quotes is one by Winston Churchill, I think, and maybe he copied it from somewhere as well, but it was something to the effect of, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You may have heard that before. Dwight Eisenhower said something to the effect of, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. And I kind of like that one because I understand where that fits in as well. So we talk a lot about planning, and we've written a lot about it. So the question is, why don't we do a very good job of it in many cases? These are some of the aliases. So as you kind of go through this process, if you've been involved in the early planning phases of projects, you probably use some of these terms. I'm going to talk about it and call it front-end planning as we go through the process, but you may just substitute your words into it to make it happen, right, as we go through this process. So, 28 years. I mean, I know this sounds like, gosh, you're going to narrow this down into 3 ideas. Took a long time to figure this out. And maybe I'm a little slow on the uptake, but there are 3 big ideas that we need to really consider and get through while we're doing that front-end planning process. They're not easy, but there are 3 big ideas. Are we building the right project? It's not an easy thing to answer. That means, is it the right economic choice? Is it the right choice for the environment? Is it going to be operable? Is it going to be maintainable? Is it going to be something that we can eventually dismantle at the end of its time? All those kinds of questions that we're looking at in terms of what we should do. And at this stage, in looking at are we doing the right project, this is the time when projects should be killed, when they should go away. Because I've talked to many companies, and every company who's done a lot of projects will tell you that they built projects that should never have been built. And I think every society has those as well. It's when we don't ask the hard questions in the front. So that's the first of the big ideas. The second is to scope the right things during that front-end planning process. So in order to scope the right things, we have to know what those things are. And over the years, I've spent a lot of time in 3 different sectors: heavy infrastructure projects, building projects, and heavy industrial, where we've actually looked at what are the things that we should scope out to be successful. Some of the things that are pretty obvious, many times we don't do a good job of understanding the geotechnical conditions. We don't understand what the environmental concerns and considerations are on the job site. If it's a building, we may not really look at what the requirements functionally are for the project, or we don't look at the space planning issues. If it's a highway or a rail line, we don't look at the horizontal and vertical alignment very closely. We don't look at our permitting requirements, our governmental requirements, and so on and so forth. There are lots of things that need to be scoped to a certain level so that our design team then doesn't have to go back and continue to ask the same questions as they move forward. And so that's a handful, but it's still there, and I'll show you a few of those as we go through the presentation. So are we doing the right project? Have we looked and investigated those things in the scope to try to reduce our risk and understand how much this thing is going to cost us? And then the last piece is, do we set the stage for successful execution? One of the real downfalls I've seen with many projects we've looked at over the years is that we don't even think about how we're going to execute or deliver the project until we get into that phase. Very much too late. One of the things that we see many times is that this whole idea of trying to commission and start up a new facility is an afterthought. Anybody ever have that happen to you? It's not a good feeling when your project is at the very end and suddenly you're trying to figure out how to turn the switch on. And so what we would like to see is that we set the stage for successful execution in that front-end planning process. And I'll talk about a few more of those things as we move forward. The process that we see most people ascribe to in front-end planning, and we published this a number of years ago. I've seen it published in a lot of other places, but it was probably some 20 plus years ago, is a phase-gated process. Some people call this a cascading process. The reality of it is we go through certain phases on the project as we like to do that so that we can actually stop and look at different gates. So phase gate 1, we would look at our feasibility. Phase gate 2, we would look at concept, and then we would detail our scope out. At this phase right here, phase 3, that's generally about 25 to 30% of our design effort is complete. So design has to take place in the front end, and that design can be architectural design, it can be civil engineering design, it can be process design. It comes in a lot of different forms, but it's design nonetheless. If we're doing design, that means we're going to spend money and resources. But what we're trying to do is get a handle on what this thing is going to eventually look like when we get down to the very end. I didn't put a cost influence curve. I know you've probably all seen the cost influence curve. Many more options up front. As we move through the life of the project, the options go down. The cost of changes go up. You've seen that in place. So that's the process. Now, it's not nearly as clean and concise and neat and nice as this diagram looks. Many times there are feedback loops and we have to go back and we have to change and we stop and we go back because we haven't done everything we should go do, and so on and so forth. I've seen in the oil and gas and mining industries there's actually a pre-phase that deals with the reservoir exploration or proving of things. Many times there's a business phase where we're looking for marketing opportunities. So there's all kinds of things that happen here, but this is generally the process map that you see most organizations go for if they've got a defined front-end planning process.